This
All
conference
right.
will
Well,
now be recorded.
well, it didn't used to do that before, but I'm glad it did announce it. So we did make some configuration changes on my go-to platform, so I'm sure that got enabled. I think I had that disabled before. Anyway, welcome to Thursday, February the 18th, Data Usability Workgroup meeting. I'm going to turn it over to our co-chairs to facilitate the agenda.
Thanks, Dee Dee, and welcome everybody. I hope everybody is certainly safe and warm and with stable power and things like drinking water. So it's an unusual storm here, so hope everybody is staying safe. And thanks for coming in and engaging with the meeting here. So as usual, we'll run through a brief review of the agenda for today. Then Bill will go over the logistics of how the meeting works and some of the resources for those who may be new today or orienting yourself. Dee Dee will briefly review the request from the USCDI task force. And then we'll dive right in with Joe and review the template, and then get to work on our priority items that we are hoping to wrap up by in the next couple of meetings, so that we have our list together, and then we can go from there. And then we'll review the next steps. And again, our focus really is going to be on the usability aspect, and then really clarifying the problem statement with the use case, so we've got some practical scope that we can apply to it. Next slide. And this is just to highlight that the really breadth of the experience and representation across the industry here, with 189 organizations and 271 participants and counting. Really a great representation. So just want to thank everybody. And again, as usual, we certainly encourage you to continue to invite other colleagues for future discussions. This work group is really open to all participants. And now I'm going to hand it over to Bill.
Great, thank you, David. And I wanted to echo what David said. I hope everyone is staying safe. This has been quite a week in a lot of different places, particularly in Texas. And I know anytime we get several inches of snow in Nashville, it's an odd event. So everyone just stay safe and warm. Again, touching on our website update and kind of meeting and work group logistics, reminding everyone, especially those that are new, that this website with the URL down at the bottom is really comprehensive. We don't send things out. This is where you can receive everything and get access to both the notes as well as the presentations. And so we encourage you to send others there and to look at it yourselves. Touching again on the Sequoia Project's members, again, we really appreciate all the support by all the Sequoia Project members on this important work. And we know that each and every one of you represents a different constituent, but your support is critical to making this all possible. The next slide. And the group continues to grow, and we hope that it does even over this next year, especially as we emerge from the pandemic. I'll hand it over now to Dee Dee to talk about the USCDI.
Thank you, Bill. And again, welcome everyone. So one last time, we won't be announcing this again because we wanted to get this input before the end of February, but we were reached out to by the HITAC, the Health Information Technology Advisory Council folks, their task force for the USCDI. They are deliberating weekly on their USCDI version 2, the draft that was put out, and they are inviting comments through April 15th. Now, Sequoia is gathering information for their own comments to be put in, and we would be, happy to echo or help emphasize specific points that you may have already made. So if you have made comments or are thinking about making comments, the sooner the better. If you can get that information to, if you'll actually just send that to ddavis@sequoiaproject.org. I'll make sure I'm coordinating and pulling those together. I have received those, some comments from folks already, so thank you to those who've emailed me or chatted to me offline privately in the past. But either one of those are options as well. I'll gather your information. The goal I would ask, though, is to please put your comment in. I don't want to be the only one putting your comments in for you, but I'm happy to also echo that same comment and put it in for Sequoia. So there's two comments, addressing the same request. So again, thinking about reviewing it, was the extent of the change appropriate, the questions that we kind of put in the first bullet, and then do you also have any recommendations on the USCDI expansion process and how they are pulling together the submissions for evaluation for future data classes for consideration? There's a lot of good material on the ONC website about how they reached that expansion process. If you haven't already looked at it, I invite you to. This is the industry's kind of time to vote, just like elections. You're voting for what you think will really impact your interoperability needs the best, and hopefully we'll be able to take some of that information and also pull it into additional guidance that we'll put into our implementation guides that will hopefully be drafted between now and the end of the year. So again, we're in phase one of our work, and I think that's complementary to this request. So if you have any questions around that, again, please feel free to send an email to ddavis@sequoiaproject.org. I promise the task force we try to get the information to them before the April 15th time, because they are deliberating on this and they will be putting their recommendations forward. So this would be a way to kind of just making sure there's a triple whammy there, trying to get voices heard from multiple aspects. So that's all for me. I will turn it over to Joe to start facilitation of the items. I know, Joe, just for your knowledge, as we're getting ready for you to present, I didn't touch base with you before the call, and I apologize for that. Normally I do, but I had a call that ran up until this one began. But I did put some dates beside a few of them. I thought we could look at some of the questions, but I saw that you were doing some homework and reviewing and teeing up questions. So feel free to use what you already had in mind, or look at the worksheet and you'll see some that have the dates 2/18 to the far right. And those are some ones that I saw questions in that we might be able to tee up for today's call if you didn't already have those aligned.
Okay, thank you, Dee Dee. It's good to know that. And so 2/18 just means that they've been updated as of today?
Yeah, they've been updated as to today with some wording a little bit, and they have some questions in it that we might want to review with folks. But again, we also had all of Gary's items that we were reviewing last week, so you may want to pick up from there. I'm not saying that we should do this instead. I'm just saying if we have time, those were some of the ones that I reviewed earlier. Thanks.
Sounds good. All right, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Uh-oh.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
We can. We can.
All right. So yeah, what I will do is we'll take a look at those after. Okay, new idea. All right, so we'll jump in on Gary's, and I think what we can do is time box those and go for like 3:35, 3:40, somewhere around that time, and then we'll turn to the other ones. And I'll point out that I've added a new item at the very end, address directory pain points, which if we have time, I'll get to. It's not redoing the whole directory use case. It's just targeting a couple of pain points related to using directories. All right, so let's jump in. I think we had kind of wrapped up assured identity. Let's take a quick look at it.
I think we did the first. Yeah, I think we did the first two.
First two, okay. So we had those covered in terms of All right, data linked to action. We did that? I didn't know we did that. I thought we did a different one. Let me do a quick look at this one.
I might have, yeah, I may have remembered that wrong, but I thought we had looked at this and we.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is where we had
Now
each
I
of those.
remember.
Yeah, you are starting to say when you see the table, I think you'll notice it, but.
Yeah.
I think we were at
Okay.
the end of this one. I don't know that we got through the third one, so I think we were in this one at the end of the meeting.
Yeah. I think what we were was we were talking about the atoms lacking context. But there were a few points where it seemed like these were leaning into other issues, like the basic provenance versus some other kind of context. And then this other one, can't follow the chain of action, how things connect over time. And so we have the ability to use provenance, and then there's also this other issue of tagging documents. And we talked about maybe consider addressing this in both CDA and FHIR, but specific use cases. And I don't think we went further with that. So I kind of get the feeling that we need a little more work on this. We need some use cases laid out, some scope decisions made. So I don't know if Gary wants to take that. Yeah, but since we've given this a little bit of time, let's go to the next one. All right, data tense, past, present, future. I don't think we've hit this one.
No, we did not get to the third one. I don't
okay.
believe. I mean, we may have started it, but we didn't get through it for sure.
Right. Okay. So I'll pause to let everybody kind of refresh if you haven't read it yet.
I did see where I think, Gary, you were doing some stuff in the background too. So if there's anything you would like, since this was yours, if you would like to help present it or add any other commentary, feel free to do so.
Sure. Well, part of our challenge, of course, is that even if we have good provenance, the provenance relates to when data is captured, not necessarily to when data it pertains. So if there are things that are historical versus current activities versus planned activities, oftentimes it's not clear. Something's been scheduled for an appointment's been scheduled for next week, or there's some other planned activities such as a surgery or upcoming procedure of some sort. We may want to know about it, but we want to know that it's not something that's already happened, that it's actually something that's planned to happen.
So I have a question for you. Is this pain point related to end users not seeing this? Or is it that systems are not capturing the tense correctly?
Well, it relates to something along the lines of what we talked about last week, in the sense that data is often individual atoms. And so the question is, are those atoms, to what do those atoms pertain? Are they describing something that has already happened? Are they describing something that's currently in progress, pending? Are they describing something that is planned for the future? So I think that's really where the challenge is, to have that context, to be clear on that context in the sense of what the end user is looking at.
Okay. Can you give me an example of something?
Well, anything
Gary,
related
to.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. This is Lisa Nelson. I was tracking on what you were saying here, and just yesterday I was talking with the folks from NCQA, and we were talking about some challenges and the difference between, for example, planned procedures versus procedures that have already happened and been performed. And they were talking about the impact that that has in quality measures, because people aren't being clear in their CDA documents on which is, to use the correct mood code, and then they are putting plan procedures in the history of procedures section, and it's causing all kinds of confusion. So maybe that would be an example, like a relevant example for what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's.
I think it's a good example. One of the ones that we've dealt with in the past is with colonoscopies. So satisfying exactly as you're saying, a quality measure. The colonoscopy may have been scheduled for next month versus it was completed this week.
Okay. So these are the kinds of problems that wouldn't show up by running it through a static validator, because the validator wouldn't know what should have been put where, right? It would see things in the procedures section and it wouldn't know that those actually were planned.
Right. The content would
this
look
is
valid, but it wouldn't.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have separated the that context of something that had occurred versus something that's planned to occur.
I also
Yeah.
think that there's like a lack of awareness for people who are processing, and awareness of mood codes is a sensitivity that some systems may not have yet, that they have to be educated about. They're only looking for procedure.code to equal to whatever that CPT code of the colonoscopy is. Then they're going to the program isn't written to be sensitive to understand how to pick up the context.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and sort of as to extend it further, in the quality and value-based care world, as we talk about bringing external data in and interoperability to help us, close care gaps with the colonoscopy use case. If the colonoscopy happened at X interval ago and is going to be due, you want to be able to leverage the context of that timing so that when you actually bring it into your system from somewhere else, that it appropriately places it so that you know how to schedule the upcoming colonoscopy or, ping a reminder.
Okay,
Right.
so let's talk about how we could scope this for something deliverable. I sketched one thing we could do, because it sounds like there's two sides to it. It sounds like one thing is we have generators that are not generating correctly, but we can't solve it by saying run your CDAs through some validator. I don't think the problem is that the data can't be recorded correctly, because CDA has mood code and FHIR has I don't know exactly what, but I'm pretty sure it has the same kind of thing. So the data fidelity could be there. So one thing is work on the generators, and I guess we could provide guidance or requirement, or we could even enumerate test cases for generators to test various tenses. I don't know if we would have any governance, but we could at least say, here's a test suite, and we might even say, here are some particular things to test, like appointments or orders. Does that seem like a reasonable area for work?
I think it would be a good concentrated effort, to kind of throw up some examples that are in the future versus completed, and then see, in the way of testing procedures. I don't know if the other people have good examples. Those are the main ones around quality measures that we've been finding.
Okay.
Right.
So
So
the goal would
Tom
be to
has
prove that it. Go ahead.
a note in the
Negation
chat.
might. Sorry, Gary?
I was just noting Tom's chat comment here regarding timestamps, because the data's in there, so it has a provenance stamp on it, presumably, but that's when it was documented.
Right. Author.time.
Right.
Is, yeah.
Yeah, we could pop a couple examples up. But
so I think what Tom's talking about is slightly different. Just before we shift to that, I wanted to add an extra monkey wrench in there around negation. If you say that a procedure was not performed, and that could also trip people up if you're only searching for the code. And that would affect quality measures as well. If you're explicitly expressing that the procedure was not performed and somebody goes, oh, I'm looking for procedure code with this CPT code, I found it, boom, you've done it. And they're not checking negation in, that could also be a problem.
Yeah,
Right.
things like vaccinations would also fall into that category.
Mm-hmm. Given,
so I think
given.
we definitely, oh, sorry, Lisa.
Go ahead, Dee Dee.
So it definitely sounds we understand this problem. Is there a different? We talked about there being two sides to this, just to make sure we get through as many of these as we can, since we are starting to run through dates here. Do we understand this as the problem, Gary? Is there anything we left out based on what you put here? Because I think we can clarify this a bit in the proposal document based on some of Joe's notes here, and add the use case specific information, because I think that's one of the things that we could help clarify it. The goal is just to remind everybody to try to get these descriptions, the problem itself specifically, as clear enough to allow you guys to vote on it. In probably 2 to 3 weeks, 3 weeks out, I believe March 11th, we will be introducing a survey where you're going to vote and tell us which you think should be priority for us to address. So we want to make sure you understand the problem. So
Dee Dee, I think you have to include some examination of what's being done with the effective time data element.
Gotcha.
Tom's point about a tetanus shot, if you need to know not when it was recorded, but when did it happen, then you need to know not only, when was it recorded is the author timestamp, and when did it happen is to correctly populate the effective time of that procedure. Or medication administration in this example. So I think you'd have to, besides mood code, negation in your examples would also want to be clear about author timestamp and effective time of the actual information object.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, I think, in other words, there's ways to address it that we could actually document for sure.
Yep.
And having captured this, we'll make sure to address this and put this in the document a bit more once we start writing it for sure, so we don't lose this part. But yeah, I think that would definitely help address the problem. Anything else that would help others understand this better?
All right, I've captured some notes. I've put them under the open issues. I think that this was like discussion too, right? Or just...
Yeah, and just so while you're typing that, because I know it's hard to think and talk at the same time, Joe, so just so everybody knows transparently, the co-chairs and Joe and I will be meeting over the next couple of weeks to try to make sure that we really do have these documents as clear as possible, and getting them ready. So I will advise everyone to, as you have a little bit of time, do your homework, look through the documents, insert any questions. I mean, these documents are open for you to go in and edit. If you want to clarify something or add your own perspective, maybe you're wearing a public health hat on and you need something different based on this or whatever, I'm using that as an example, just make sure that you're thinking about it from your perspective and it's clear in there. So feel free to add any detail, text, comments, questions. We'll be doing that homework in between to try to get the documents as well formed as possible.
Great.
Thanks, Joe, for capturing those notes.
Yeah. I'm just going to make a point here to see the CCDA example site, because we'll probably make heavy use of that for this.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Good work item. We can certainly do that. Let's do the next one. Data in context. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Dee Dee. Actually,
yeah,
thanks
and
everybody.
I'll take some of these chats. I'll take these chats and stick them in the right places, Joe, so you can,
great.
can continue facilitating, and I'll double team back here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, when searching, let's make a note when you capture those notes that we might want to consider the searching use case, and see if there's anything that could be determined about the state of something when you're searching. All right, data and context. Okay. Okay, if I scroll. I'm gonna scroll. Difficult to discern how data and fits within its broader context.
Yeah, this was one that I had commented that I think this needs some massaging into getting it into an achievable thing, because it is a real issue, that's for sure, but it's very broad. And is there something that we could even use as like a first stab at figuring it out?
Yeah, this also looks like a provenance use case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know the basic provenance group looked at this, and maybe we just add this problem to our provenance one, or do we keep it as a separate one?
I think it's reasonable to add the provenance, because that way we can always be a lumper now and split it off. But I think as long as this is a problem that needs to be addressed within that context, so we're not ignoring it.
Yeah, I think it'll make more sense too, because it'll let us show the level of effort. We were talking about that on a co-chair call previously. We need to understand how big these are. If we lump it together, we'll see the bigger picture of it, I think.
Yeah. What is this appendix from? Is this whoever added this to the?
I think this is Gary.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at something else at the moment. Okay, yeah, there we go. So basically, this is taking the blood pressure example that has an immediate context of a particular observation. But then if you look at that, so the immediate context is basically the who, what, when, where, and why, of course, which ties fairly nicely into provenance model. Probably a little bit broader than most people think of as provenance when you get into whys and hows and those kinds of things. Under what circumstances, those are things maybe a little beyond what people are considering as provenance, but certainly are pertinent in the context of blood pressure measurement. And then looking at the extended context, where you have multiple examples of where how blood pressure fits into other activities, such as vital signs that are taken, basic vital signs which are taken, and then in inpatient vital sign monitoring. Obviously, those are things that would happen on a routine basis. Maybe it's hourly, maybe it's every few hours in an inpatient setting. And then if you're looking at it from an outpatient, an outpatient history and physical assessment, you would also have a vital sign typically captured in that context. And then you may have weekly monitoring. In other words, these are different examples of where blood pressure fits. And so having that context, item D there is saying, okay, we want to rule out hypertension. So maybe we want the patient to have a blood pressure measure over several days, over several weeks, to either rule in or rule out hypertension. And then if you were to then determine that the patient probably has hypertension, put them on some kind of a medication regimen, then you may want to have some kind of routine monitor thereafter to say, is this medication effective? Are there side effects? Are there any other things going on that we need to be aware of? So, blood pressure in the context is something that needs to be considered as well.
All right. So this looks like, I take back what I said before. I think provenance is a part of it, but hearing you, this is a really good example, right? Because we're looking at vital signs. And if I were to paraphrase what I heard from you, it is that when you're dealing with vital signs, there are a network of potential links to other things that allow you to interpret those in some context. And it could also, as Tom points out, it could also include the narrative. And what I'm thinking how we should approach this is that we do a use case analysis. Like we would make a work item to say, let's examine the vitals use case, and let's look at where the links are there and which links we really have to have, which links are optional to include, and which narrative needs to be in place for us to tell the story, for us to deliver care with the vitals. And then I don't know if that's the right way to slice it, but it seems like we would be missing out on what your point here is if we just addressed this as a simple provenance thing.
Yeah, Joe,
Is that?
it strikes me, Joe, that this and several of the other ones connect to this idea of sort of the steel thread narrative that Tom brought up a couple weeks ago. It seems like all these sort of go together. I'm not trying to make this too big, but my thought is that if we think about these sort of in the same context, it may help to come up with some scope that we can get our arms around that doesn't seem too big.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the Uber issue that we've heard the last few weeks, which is that if you've got a given task and you've got a pile of documents available to you, there's a way that you can string those documents together and string the things in those documents together to help tell the story that helps you do your job.
Exactly.
That's what it sounds like. So I'm suggesting that what we do is enumerate the jobs that we want to do work items for. Is because we can't boil the ocean, right? We have to do this in some sort of piece, some prioritized pieces. So what should those pieces be? I'm thinking it's some kind of a use case. So which data in context, which use cases do we want to support? Or can we start with one? Or am I completely off base and we should just approach this as, let's just add some basic provenance, like for all use cases?
Well, if we're going to, I like the idea of applying a use case, and then with the idea of something that actually from that use case can be scaled. So if we're really trying to focus on an initial priority list and then something that we can revisit, then this may be something that is practical and manageable for our first pass of our priority list.
Okay, so how do we get Dee Dee logistically and co-chairs? How do we elicit the best use cases to approach this data in context lens with?
I think, this is my first recommendation, and then co-chairs, please chime in or disagree with me if you feel free. But in our template, we have use cases in there. So I would invite everyone who's heard this conversation to make sure that we have that information pretty well defined from a user perspective. I mean, look at the little, green text there that gives you guidance of what we're looking for in this section. So if we can ask you to behind the scenes, give us some specific use case examples as Joe's typing, that we want to apply this data in context to. And remember, we want to take a baby step. So we can't solve world hunger overnight, but what can we do that'll be the biggest impact in your data usability workflows? And let's make it something in context like, we've been discussing here. Does that make sense?
It does, Dee Dee.
Yeah,
I think that's a great example, that vital signs table that was pulled up before. B through D are focused on 4 different settings. And it's an opportunity where you could make the use cases that would go with those 4 scenarios and start right out by figuring out what's the right type of document that would be created from an encounter that's appropriate for the scenario that's sketched out. And then you can further ask, you can use it for your vital signs question. And then you could use it probably that scenario. You could use that to explore other things as well.
I think that's great. Vital signs kind of crosses lots of different avenues. Sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
No. I think I agree with that. I think it really does. And it seems to me there's two sides to this. And one of them is the one that Tom has brought up in both in the chat today and previous, is around narrative and the importance of narrative. And I think we want to, that's a big part of how we might solve this. I think there's another piece, and Gary calls it out in some of the elements and the metadata, and that's really around, all the why and the how. Those things may be captured in different EHRs, but it doesn't mean that the generators actually put that into the CCDA. And is there a place for all of those things in the CCDA? So there might be, we don't want to lose fidelity in data as we move, and then we want to be able to capture it as a broader narrative. So maybe there's two sides to how this might work.
Now, this is a scope question. Do we want to do this for both CDA and fire? The guidance that we're talking about here, is that in scope for both?
It feels like
it's such a central.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in general, the way I think about it is whatever solution, it shouldn't be constrained to one standard.
Well, I think we'll be able to get a little further along with CDA than we will in fire, but I could be mistaken. We have to do the homework, but just wanted to let everyone know that I think they should both be in scope because I think it's good, but I wanted to confirm that others felt that that was useful. Perfect. Thank you.
Dee Dee, I'll say it's time. I'm a proponent. This is Lisa Nelson. I think it's time for all of us to be bilingual and speak both CDA and fire. So we might as well get used to it.
I completely agree. Well, it'll show us where the gaps are too. I think it'll just help inform the industry overall. So I agree. All right. So I think we know. I think we understand. Yeah. I think we understand this one fairly well.
So do we have homework then for the group to put stuff under here and to nominate use cases?
And also, I mean, Lisa, you know even better than I do. If you know of standards or specific implementation guides that already have other guidance that we point to, in other words, there may be somebody that's already had some of this documented. If anyone knows of that, please feel free to put it in. Thinking in, at least with my hat on, I don't know of anything that we've ever really documented this with anywhere, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to put that in the standards and systems section for here. Please feel free to type that in. And I did put the link to this Google document so everyone can click on these hyperlinks. And I apologize if anyone cannot get to the Google document, please let me know. We'll try to get you a copy of the Excel spreadsheet at the minimum.
All right, great. Any other questions on this one before we move to the next? All right, time check, we're at 3:40.
Keep going through these. I mean, we're on a roll here. We need to get through all of these, so go for it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep going. All right, data traceability, source of truth. If it can be traced to a known or trusted point of origination and source of truth. Okay, this also looks provenance-y. Wait, I feel like we've seen this one before.
I had left that comment there about whether we could combine it with the guidance for data provenance work item. Is that? I mean, maybe there's another detail Gary was trying to address, but I thought that might be an opportunity for consolidating.
Yeah, this feels consolidation necessary. I want to say something in general about provenance. Provenance is a big toolbox. It gives you a lot of things that you could potentially link together. And the tension is always in, is it worth the effort to populate all those links and all that extra data? The reason that everybody isn't already using provenance is that so far there hasn't been the case made for providing a lot of that data. That's part of the reason that HL7 did basic provenance for US CDI, and they throttled it way down. It was just like author and timestamp,
Yeah,
because that's good
there
enough
was
for some use
pushback.
cases.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
pushback by the industry saying that that would impact the graphical user interface because it may require that data be clicked on. You might be able to say today's date, but you had to actually verify that information as a user. So thinking about it from a usability of the data enterer as well as the data consumer.
Mm-hmm. So as a software engineer, it would be ideal in my world to populate everything. Everything should be traceable, versioned, and everything, you know, so that machines could just navigate all these links and tell where everything was. But that is assuming no cost and no impact of populating that. So what I've perceived is that the best way to approach provenance is with specific use cases, where you say, okay, for this specific use case, we have to have this kind of information populated. And so in this case, is this a use case for the original point of origin beyond, say, the last hop? So if you think about the basic provenance paper, they talk about that last hop. Okay, so if an item goes from A to B to C, and it doesn't get changed, then I think basic provenance says you got to keep that original author that whole way through. So the author at system A is still pointing in that entry, even though it's now in system C. Is that accurate?
No. Once
Not accurate?
once B consumes A's, it's now B's, and if C gets it from B, C only knows that they got it from B. Like that's what the basic provenance has been stated for. Is basically you know who you got it from, but not where they got it from. Like
I
as
thought
soon
they
as
had to
you
preserve the author.
as soon as you consume that data, you basically take ownership of it. Like if you didn't consume it, I guess, or make it part of the patient's chart and somehow pass that along, that would be a different answer, I think.
Right.
But like if you're consuming that in, now you're basically taking ownership of the data to say
No.
now it's like who consumed it on your side and what date and time of that, basically.
Okay.
Right. And that's the part, I think that's the hardest part about all the provenance and the point of origin is like, what is really the point of origin? Because like we've been operating for CCDAs for many, many years now and consuming across multiple organizations, and we've never kept track of it. So like, how do we know who it actually started with or who actually, diagnosed the condition now that it's already 10 organizations deep shared? How do you do that versus a new diagnosis, right? Because a new diagnosis is easier, right? Because if you get a new diagnosis today for hypertension, like the onset is today, the diagnosis date is today, and you could easily share that provenance going forward as it moves through other health systems. But it's like, what do you do about all the data that is already out there? How useful is it to do things like that? I think provenance, as you said, Joe, provenance is a huge toolbox that we could really do a lot of great things with
So an
as far as like,
intermediary, and
right. But
even when
how do we
it's
get there?
transformed, it shall retain the author of the source system. The only time that you get rid of it is when there's a reconciliation process. And that's when a
Right.
provider says, I bless this new med list. They become the new author, right?
Well, yeah, but the intermediary is like an HIE. Like in most scenarios here, you're talking like EHR to EHR, where it's going to fall into the other one where you consume it and you assume provenance at that point.
That's not how I read this. I mean, I'm looking through these are the use cases that they cover, and there's like 4 of them, right? So here's the HIE use case where there's no transformation. It's like CDA in, CDA out, right? I think in that case, the author like if it's just a single document, a single author, it's the same document and same author. If there's no transformation, I think this document, this guide requires that author to be saved, not overwritten by the HIE. Am I incorrect?
Right, and you see that in the second paragraph under 213 there.
Yeah. So we could adopt the basic provenance guide and check this box for this work item, right?
If you're an HIE.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, well, the bullets that I showed cover all 4 use cases. So here's the one case where you change stuff. Here's where you reconcile 2 peanut allergies into 1. And here's where the actual authors change from Dr. Jones and Smith to Dr. Reconciled. And that's the only time that the author changes. And then the other ones, even when you're just transforming the format or you're aggregating it, the authors stay. Oh, wait, hold a second. The HIA is receiving information, adding their own additional information. The HIA is the only author of the new content. All right, so that one I'm confused by. Because here, it's saying what you're saying.
I think that's why there's 4 colored lines. So it's not implied there isn't a key, but you see there's green, black, purple, and a new blue line at the bottom there that got added.
Okay. So, oh, it's not the only author. It's only the author. Okay. Of the new content. Okay, so that's consistent then. So the old stuff, as you say, contains its authorship. So,
Right. So
yeah.
Joe, I think you need to keep scrolling because I think you saw the 2-to-1 and now you have the 1-to-1. And I think that's
Yeah.
which one you're talking about, right? Like you have pneumonia from Dr. Thompson at Good Health. You now consume it as pneumonia from Dr. Accepted at Community Health. And you have switched the provenance to Dr. Accepted at Community Health as soon as you've accepted and reconciled that data, even though you actually haven't changed it.
Yeah, and that's because it went through an interactive reconciliation process. So, so yeah, I get that. The question then would be, okay, going back to Gary's item, are you saying that for your use case in this example, you would still want to know about Dr. Thompson, even though Dr. Accepted did the legal requirement to reconcile and take ownership and take authorship?
If we were moving this issue into a provenance piece, I think that's what we're asking for. I think is like, even if it's not maintained the provenance, it could just be that like we need to maintain the full provenance history, because if you know, like you got it from like Dr. Accepted got it from Dr. Thompson and Dr. Thompson got it from Dr. Lammy and Dr. Lammy got it from Dr. Vogt, and you had all 4 of those hops, like you could technically reconcile your data better once you got that data from all 4 of those sources, and you could look at them all and look at all their provenance and say, hey, look at this pneumonia is actually the same and it actually originated at Dr. Vogt. Therefore, I don't need the other 3. I can just take Dr. Vogt's and I now have the source of truth.
Got it. Okay. Well, would Gary, do you want to accept that as an additional requirement for this use case, that we're gonna hold on to Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith authorship in some way? Because I believe that's covered in other provenance guides, like the IHE reconciliation profile and the larger HL7 data provenance guide. I think they cover ways to record those back traces. Is that what you want this work item to be? That even through a reconciliation process?
Yes,
okay.
Ideally.
Okay, so that's what we're saying.
Joe, I think the hardest part of that workflow in my head is like if everything like is perfect, right, and I just take the values in and they all map into my system perfectly and everything is the exact same, it's
Uh-huh.
feasible. But like a lot of times, like it doesn't map perfectly into your system and you have to like change the reaction slightly for an allergy or to map it to like your value versus what was sent in and those types of things. And that's where the
Uh-huh.
provenance gets tricky because like what is actually a change versus what's an interpretation that provenance doesn't need to change on. And that's where I feel like some of the guidance is needed the most because like to tell them that they're the same but different resource is different than like they're the exact same. And that's where I feel like
Right.
provenance really needs to try to morph or maybe try to handle that is like, an allergy that had a reaction change along the way is probably still the same allergy, right? But it has a few different pieces that are different. And like, how do you make sure those are the same, but yet updated? And like,
Right. Right.
And when is
I'm
it
gonna write
safe
this
to
under.
drop the information, right? Because it could be a progression of worse reactions. And so just going, well, I think these are
right,
the same, and even though the reaction's not the same, I'm going to keep this one because it was the most recent or something, where really the important story is that this person had one reaction to an interaction a year ago and a different reaction 6 months ago, and now is coming in with a third level of reaction. And what's relevant is that progression.
right. Or they grew out of it, right? They had an allergy and now as they got it again and now they didn't react and now that's important. Like so that's
Yep.
that's where I feel like we really need to reconcile like how to handle those small hops and changes, but also let the receiving system know that these really are the same. It's just that things have slightly been changed, but they really are still the base model is the same. It just had a few extra additions added to it.
Right.
I've always been trying to figure out what we could do with that darn problem concern template that allows multiple problem observations to be gathered underneath it. Maybe we should look at, is this an appropriate way for a system that is doing that kind of gathering of things, like my intelligence says all these things are really the same problem even though there's slight differences. I'm going to gather them all up, stick them, bundle up in a single problem concern, and let these 3 or 4 different problem observations be clustered right here, and then let some human figure out whether I should consolidate and sort of reconcile it all back into just a single problem observation, maybe with an extended effective time range, or whatever is the right thing to do. But we've been, that template has been a template searching for a purpose for a very long time, and maybe for a data aggregator, it would be a possible way of using it.
Well, what if we took it as our 2 use cases to go forward with, and maybe we can elucidate those over the next week, problems and allergies, because they're part of kind of the core data. They're pretty critical. They're important to exchange across and to know the history of, and maybe we could use those as the examples to really build this out, and then make later recommendations on extending it. But if we could figure it out using these, that would be a good start.
Yeah, and there's room in that template that we could keep the provenance of who did the aggregation separate from the provenance of the individual observations, so we wouldn't be stomping on anything. My
Right.
biggest concern about deduplication is putting a system or person in the position of having to eliminate data that could be valuable. So this gathering strategy using problem concern, and there's the same concern wrapper around allergies. So if we work out the pattern, we could do it in both places.
Right. Exactly.
So what you're saying is we want to take on the use case of lumping and splitting, right?
Lumping. We hadn't said anything about splitting yet, just lumping.
All right.
I think if we tackled those, we would understand the issue much greater to a much greater degree.
Yeah. Okay. We're definitely seeing some synergy between items because our other
Dr.
one
Miller
is
liked my comment about letting the human decide. So I would say that when it comes to splitting, I'd much rather have the machine do an effective job of pulling like things together and then let the knowledgeable humans ultimately decide about what's the right move in terms of deduplicating the data. That's where clinical knowledge really makes a difference.
Totally agree. We have that in our deduplication guidance work item where we've got that like computer mediated but human decided grouping. Yeah. Okay. We're at the very end.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're up on time. I didn't know we'd have enough time to do one more or not. I'd like to open up for the co-chairs to do any parting remarks before we close the call.
Great discussion from my view. I enjoyed this one today.
All right. Thanks, Gary, for all your work items.
Sorry, I was on mute. Just was going to say I echo that. Great discussion and great momentum. So thanks.
Yeah. I love when we're starting to see patterns, so I think we're going to be doing some homework again behind the scenes to consolidate some of these things, but please continue to watch. We will try to address the open questions between now and when we're going to open up the survey mid-March. So with that, everyone have a wonderful day. Stay safe and healthy and warm, hopefully, too, and we'll see you next time, same time next week. Have a great day.
Thanks.